Admiral Kirby, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Absolutely. Good to be with you.
Thank you. President Biden said in Jeddah during the GCC summit, we will not walk away and leave a vacuum to be filled by China, Russia, or Iran. Yet right after President Biden's trip to the region, we see Vladimir Putin went to Tehran to meet Iranian leaders and Turkish president. Is this trip a matter of concerns to the administration?
Well, we'll let those leaders talk to the trip and whatever their agenda is, but I think in part what you're seeing here is a couple of things. One, I think it's further indications of just how isolated from the international community countries like Iran and Russia have become, that they are now meeting and talking about the provision of now drone capabilities to Mr. Putin. Number two, I think it's an indication that Mr. Putin is becoming desperate in terms of trying to replenish his inventory of advanced systems. Now he's got to go to Iran, which has a domestic drone capability, production capability, to get drones for his war. And number three, and this is probably the most significant sign, is that it's an indication that Mr. Putin has absolutely no intention of ending this war or sitting down in good faith with President Zelensky. Quite the contrary. He has every indication, obviously because he's going to Iran shopping for drones, to continue to prosecute this war, to continue to kill Ukrainians. He can still do the right thing. Whether it's in Tehran or it's in Moscow, he could do the right thing by ending this war.
So this is his fifth trip to Iran. Do you see that as a diplomatic counterpoint to President Biden's trip?
No, I mean, I think, again, we'll let these leaders speak for themselves, but I think it might be a stretch to read in that this is some sort of counterpoint to President Biden's trip. We know that Putin is interested in Iranian drones. We know that the Turks and Russia and Ukraine are in talks about grain shipments potentially coming out of Odessa. So I don't know that I would read that it's a counterpoint to the president's trip. In fact, quite the contrary. If you look at just the split screen here, you had the president going into the region to have bilateral and multilateral discussions about what? About an integrated, more cooperative Middle East across a range of issues. And you got President Putin on this trip, basically shopping for drones and looking for ways to prosecute this war and dealing with another nation, Iran, which is, again, increasingly isolated from the international community because of their growing nuclear ambitions, their failure to sign on to the deal that is on the table before them, their burgeoning ballistic missile capabilities, their support for terrorist groups, their threats in the maritime environment in the Gulf region. I mean, I could go on and on and on.
So in terms of integration, you mentioned President Biden said in his presser in Jeddah that we discussed Saudi Arabia's security needs to defend the kingdom given very real threats from Iran and Iran's proxies. So what is it the U.S. providing to Saudis?
We continue to provide the Saudis with defensive capabilities. This is a country that is under attack almost every single day. It's also a country in which we have 70,000 Americans, to include thousands of U.S. troops who continue to be under threat by attacks across the border. Now, I would tell you, we're now on our 15th, going into, I think, 16th week of a ceasefire in Yemen that the Saudis helped broker, of course, with U.S. engagement as well. And we welcome that. We're grateful for that. We hope that extends because it is literally saved thousands of lives, thousands of Yemeni lives. There's still great humanitarian need in Yemen, but we are committed to making sure that Saudi Arabia can continue to defend itself against future threats. One of the things that we didn't talk about yet, but that the president talked about when he was in the region, was trying to forge a more integrated air and missile defense capability across the region, not just bilaterally with Saudi. And of course, Saudi Arabia continues to be under threat of attack, both from drones and from missiles. But we believe there's great benefit to trying to net together some of these air and missile defense capabilities that many of our Gulf allies and partners have intrinsically on their own. We've helped them develop some of those. Some of them they have on their own. We think, as we've learned through our own experience in the U.S. military, that when you can integrate, get get a network, get these capabilities sort of niched together so that they can have a greater effect. And while there's no architecture in place right now, the discussions on the president's trip were constructive and positive, and I think there's great promise there if we can continue to advance this idea.
I'm sure you heard that Faisal bin Farhan, Saudi Foreign Minister, said that GCC leaders didn't have any discussion on this Israeli alliance with GCC on the missile defense system.
Well, again, I'm talking about integrated air and missile defense across the region. It's not just about, Israel being integrated into that. That said, Israel also has very sophisticated air and missile defense capabilities. And again, these are sovereign decisions that these countries have to make about whether they're going to move forward on this idea. And certainly there are sovereign decisions that they have to make if they're going to improve their relationships with each other, and that includes with Israel. We come away from this trip feeling very positive about some of the cooperative steps that are already occurred. And you saw that Saudi Arabia on this trip announced that they're going to open up their airspace to all civilian aircraft, including Israeli aircraft, that we're going to for the first time since the late 70s, we're going to be able to take peacekeepers off the Tehran Islands in the Red Sea. So look, every nation there has to decide for themselves how they're going to integrate and whether they're going to normalize their relations with Israel. But there are some things changing. There are more positive signals. As King Abdullah of Jordan said, there's a new vibe in the region. And that was another reason why the president thought it was so important to go.
So President Biden in Jeddah said, we have now finalized an agreement to connect Iraq's electric grid to the GCC grid through Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and reducing this dependence on Iran. Why does the U.S. think that it's important to reduce the dependence on Iran for Iraqi people?
We think that the Iraqi people, obviously they have to make these decisions for themselves, but they are key partners of ours, certainly in the continued fight against ISIS. And we are very invested in Iraq and making sure that Iraq is secure and stable and prosperous. And it's not just the United States, but even Iraqis will tell you that they want to be more integrated into the region. And so this decision does that. It does help integrate Iraq in with her GCC partners and friends and neighbors. And we think that's a positive thing for the whole region.
Do you support Iraq joining GCC?
That's up to Iraq and members of the GCC. The United States isn't going to take a position on that. We do favor, as we've said, a more integrated, cooperative Middle East, but these are sovereign decisions that these nations have to make.
So who's funding this project, the electricity grid going through Kuwait and Saudi Arabia?
This would be something that the GCC countries would work out.
On nuclear issue, in Israel, President Biden emphasized on diplomacy with Iran. Prime Minister Lapid said diplomacy will not stop them. The only way to stop them is to put a credible military threat on the table. Is this disagreement a matter of concern for the president?
I don't think we would call this a disagreement. Our Israeli friends see the threat from Iran in the same way that we do. They don't want to see Iran become a nuclear-armed state. No problem in the Middle East, none. Gets easier to solve with Iran having a nuclear weapon. And so we respect the Israeli view here. We understand it. We appreciate it. Israel is such a key partner and friend in the region. The president believes that diplomacy is the best first path forward. And that is why he has invested so much into making sure that these negotiations continue. And now they're basically complete. And now there's a deal on the table, and now it's up to Iran to take that deal or not. If they want to see sanctions relief, if they want to be less isolated from the rest of the world, there's a deal on the table. Take that deal, come back into compliance, the sanctions relief will come, and the region will be safer for it. If they don't do that, then we're going to continue to work with our allies, partners, and friends, including Israel, to make sure that pressure increases on Iran. That's one. Two, we're also going to stay plugged in to our allies, partners, and friends to make sure that we have the appropriate capability and capacity in the region to defend our national security interests if we need to.
Yeah, in the Jerusalem, so-called Jerusalem Declaration signed by President Biden and Prime Minister Lapid, it says Washington will use all elements of its national power to ensure Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. Does this declaration mean the U.S. and Israel jointly can deter a threat of nuclear war?
I think the whole region, and this is another reason why, we want to work on integrated air and missile defense capabilities. There's a terrific promise there in terms of being able to try to deter Iran should you need to do that from a security perspective. But again, the president believes diplomacy is the best path forward, that diplomacy is the right approach to take, and there is a deal now. Again, it's up to Iran to decide whether they're going to take that deal.
Do you think an Israeli-Arab alliance will push Iran toward a nuclear deal?
I will let Iran speak for their intentions here. We know that they have gotten closer to a capability, closer than they were when the JCPOA was put into action in the Obama administration. And thanks to the preceding administration to us pulling out of the Iran deal, Iran has been able now to move forward towards trying to get that capability. And so they're closer now than they were 6-7 years ago. That's troubling to everybody. Again, we believe that coming back into compliance with the JCPOA is the best path forward. It's in Iran's interest, it's in the region's interest, it's certainly in our interest. But the president has also been clear, he's not going to take any option off the table. We are absolutely fundamentally committed to never allowing Iran to become a nuclear-armed state, to not having a nuclear weapon. The president was crystal clear about that on this trip. And he's not going to take any option off the table. The preferred option is diplomacy.
Does the Biden administration want Iranian oil back into the world market to bring down the price of oil?
This discussion about Iran and the nuclear deal has nothing to do with their oil. It has everything to do with them not becoming a nuclear-armed state.
So you don't mind if they sell their oil at this point?
This discussion about Iran and the nuclear deal has nothing to do with their oil. It has everything to do with them not becoming a nuclear-armed state.
So you don't mind if they sell their oil at this point?
They are already, because of sanctions, there's some limits put on their ability to tap into these markets.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that we don't leave people with the impression that we're trying to pursue the JCPOA, getting them into compliance because there's some underlying tone of getting their oil on the market. That could be a tangential result of this. If they come back into compliance, the sanctions relief will come. There could be benefits to the Iranian people and the Iranian people's economy and their own financial future, but that is downstream. The focus is on trying to halt their march towards a nuclear weapons capability.
When I announced about our interview on social media, hundreds of messages came in. I would like to share a couple of them quickly with you. The President Biden said in Jeddah, the future belongs to countries where women can exercise equal rights. A social media user, Santi, asked, does human rights in Iran have the same priority as the nuclear issue for Biden administration?
Human rights are a central core value of President Biden's foreign policy. It's right at the center. And he never misses an opportunity or a chance to advance human rights. Obviously, we have nothing against the Iranian people. And we certainly want to see the Iranian people safe and secure and prosperous. That's difficult for them to be, given the path that their government is taking.
But probably the last time President Biden talked about the struggle of Iranian people for freedom, it goes back to I don't know when. I mean, is there any reason President Biden is not supporting them?
The implication that the president's not supporting the Iranian people is just patently false. This is not about the Iranian people. We certainly would like to see the Iranian people be safe and secure and prosperous. And that is why, quite frankly, it's a key part of why we believe strongly that Iran should not get a nuclear weapon, because no problem in the Middle East, no problem for the Iranian people gets easier if they have a nuclear weapon. All that does is decrease stability and security in the region. All that does is increase the chances of some sort of conflict.
President Biden said foundational freedoms are key to who we are as Americans, as you suggested. In just 6 first months of 2022, 251 people were executed in Iran. Elahe, a social media user, has asked what should happen to make the Biden administration believe that this regime is not in the interest of the U.S. and the people of Iran.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
The question
you
is,
went really fast there.
What should happen to make the Biden administration believe that this regime is not in the interest of the U.S. and the people of Iran?
We are focused on the behaviors of this regime. The behavior of marching towards a nuclear weapons capability, support for terrorism, maritime threats, an increasing ballistic missile capability. We are focused on that destabilizing behavior and making sure that we can address that destabilizing behavior. We believe diplomacy is the best way to prevent a nuclear arms capability for Iran, and we believe that shoring up, revitalizing our network of alliances and partnerships in the region is the best way to deal with that behavior.
You know that Iran holds at least 4 Americans, 4 French, 2 Swedish, 1 Belgian, 1 Polish, 2 Germans, and 2 Austrian hostage. What does President Biden hope to achieve by his recent executive order on hostages?
This executive order will allow the United States government to have additional tools and capabilities to try to bring wrongfully detained American citizens back home. It includes additional visa restrictions. It includes the potential for additional sanctions. It gives us yet one more set of tools to try to bring all Americans who are wrongfully detained home.
Admiral Kirby, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thanks.